The gunshot rang out through the still dawn air, sending a flock of startled birds scattering across the crimson sky as Nora Kendrick scrambled through the underbrush, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Blood trickled from the scratch on her cheek, but she dared not slow down to wipe it away. 3 days on the run had left her exhausted, starved, and desperate, but still alive, which was more than she'd expected when the sheriff's men had burst through her door back in Ruby City, Colorado. It was 1878, and the West was supposed to be a place of new beginnings. Instead, Nora found herself running for her life through unfamiliar terrain, branded a murderer for a crime she never committed. At 26 years old, she had already endured more than most women twice her age, losing her parents to typhoid, working as a seamstress to support herself, and now fleeing from a hangman's noose. The rising sun cast long shadows across the scrubby landscape as Nora paused behind a large boulder, pressing her back against the cool stone as she fought to catch her breath. Her once fine blue dress was now tattered and stained with dirt and sweat, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. The saddlebag she had managed to grab in her hasty escape contained little more than a change of clothes, the remnants of a loaf of bread, and her mother's silver locket, all that remained of her former life. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent a jolt of terror through her body. They were still following her. With trembling hands, Nora gathered her skirts and prepared to run again, but her legs felt like lead, unwilling to carry her any further. "Please," she whispered to the vast, uncaring sky, "just give me somewhere to hide." As if in answer, her gaze fell upon an old barn in the distance, its weathered boards barely visible through the morning mist. With renewed determination, Nora pushed herself forward, stumbling over rocks and through patches of prickly brush until she reached the dilapidated structure. The door hung loosely on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as she slipped inside. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of sunlight that filtered through cracks in the walls. The musty smell of old hay and animal droppings filled her nostrils as she searched frantically for a hiding place. A ladder led to a loft area, and with the last of her strength, Nora climbed up, collapsing into a pile of moldy hay just as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder outside. She held her breath, listening as riders approached the barn. Terror seized her heart when the door swung open with a loud groan. Peering through a gap in the floorboards, she could see 2 men below, neither wearing a badge, but both armed with pistols. "Check the back," one of them growled. "The bounty said dead or alive, and I aim to collect. Bounty hunters." Somehow worse than the law, these men had no interest in justice, only money. Nora pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Her situation was growing more desperate by the minute. The men searched the barn thoroughly, overturning barrels and jabbing pitchforks into hay piles. One of them started toward the ladder, and Nora inched backward, pressing herself against the wall, knowing there was nowhere left to run. The crack of a rifle shot from outside froze everyone in place. The bounty hunters exchanged glances before hastily retreating from the barn, guns drawn. Nora heard shouting, followed by the sound of galloping horses. Were there more hunters? Or perhaps the sheriff's posse had found her at last. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. Nora remained motionless, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Then footsteps approached the barn, a single set, heavy but unhurried. The door creaked open again, and a tall silhouette stood framed in the entrance. "I know you're in here," a deep voice called out, not threatening but firm. "Those men are gone now, but they'll be back. If you want to live, you'd best show yourself." Nora remained silent, paralyzed by fear. "I ain't the law, and I ain't a bounty hunter," the man continued. "But I know a person in trouble when I see one, and if those Jaspers were after you, you must be in a heap of it." Something in his voice, a genuine concern, perhaps gave Nora the courage to shift slightly, causing the hay to rustle. The man's gaze immediately shot up toward the loft. "Ah," he said quietly, "there you are." He moved to the ladder and began to climb, each rung creaking under his weight. Nora pressed herself further into the corner, clutching a rusted pitchfork handle as her only weapon. As the man's head appeared over the edge of the loft, she raised it threateningly. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from disuse. The man paused, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I mean you no harm, madam." In the dim light, She could now make out his features, a weathered face with kind eyes, perhaps 30 years of age, with a week's worth of stubble on his jaw. A battered cowboy hat sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical attire of a rancher, a faded blue shirt, worn denim pants, and scuffed boots. "Name's Tobias Ryder," he said calmly. "I own the small spread about 2 miles east of here. Found some unsavory types snooping around my property, followed them here." "How do I know you're not working with them?" Nora demanded, though her arm trembled with the effort of holding the pitchfork. "If I was, I wouldn't have shot over their heads to scare them off," he replied with a slight smile. "And I'd have brought them back with me instead of sending them packing." He studied her disheveled appearance. "You look like you could use a meal and a safe place to rest. I'm offering both, no questions asked, at least not yet." Nora hesitated, the pitchfork handle slipping in her sweaty grip. She had no reason to trust this stranger, but her options were severely limited. If the bounty hunters returned with reinforcements, she wouldn't stand a chance. "Why would you help me?" she asked suspiciously. "You don't know anything about me," Tobias shrugged. "My pa taught me never to turn away someone in need. Whatever trouble you're in, it can wait until you've had some food and sleep." He gestured toward the ladder. "My horse is outside. We should get moving before those fellas decide to circle back." With great reluctance, Nora lowered the pitchfork. The promise of food was too tempting, and her body was screaming for rest. If this man had wanted to harm her, he could have done so already or simply alerted the bounty hunters to her location. She began, then swayed suddenly, black spots dancing before her eyes. Tobias climbed fully into the loft and moved toward her with surprising agility. "Whoa there," he said, catching her arm as she stumbled. "When's the last time you ate, madam?" "Yesterday, maybe the day before," Nora admitted, suddenly aware of how weak she truly was. With gentle firmness, he guided her toward the ladder. "Let's get you to safety, then. You can tell me as much or as little as you want once you're strong enough to think clearly." The journey down the ladder was a challenge, with Nora's limbs trembling from exhaustion and hunger. Tobias descended first, then helped her down the rest of the way, his strong hands steady on her waist. Outside, a chestnut gelding waited patiently, tethered to a post. Tobias retrieved a canteen from his saddle and offered it to Nora. The water was lukewarm but felt like heaven on her parched throat. She drank greedily until he gently pulled it away. "Careful now," he cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." He helped her mount the horse, then swung up behind her. Nora stiffened at the unfamiliar intimacy of a stranger's body pressed against her back, but she was too exhausted to protest. As they rode away from the barn, she found herself leaning back against his solid chest, her eyelids growing heavy. "Stay awake if you can, madam," Tobias said, his voice rumbling through her. "We're not far, but I need you to hold on." Nora forced her eyes open, focusing on the scenery as they traveled. The landscape was beautiful in its ruggedness, rolling hills covered in sagebrush, rocky outcroppings, and in the distance, the majestic peaks of mountains. Under different circumstances, she might have appreciated the wildness of it all. True to his word, they arrived at a small ranch within half an hour. A modest cabin stood beside a barn and corral, with a vegetable garden to one side and a chicken coop to the other. It was humble but well-maintained, a testament to the man who owned it. Tobias dismounted first, then reached up to help Nora down. Her legs buckled as soon as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her easily, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "No offense intended, madam, but you can barely stand," he replied, carrying her toward the cabin door. "Let's get you inside and comfortable." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and 2 doors leading to what Nora assumed were bedrooms. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a well-worn armchair pulled up close to it. The furniture was sturdy and practical, much like its owner. Tobias set her down gently on a wooden chair at the table. "I'll get some food started," he said, moving to the cast-iron stove, "and heat water for you to wash up if you'd like." Nora watched him warily as he worked, still uncertain of his motives but too hungry and tired to question his hospitality at the moment. He moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the stove and putting a pot of water to heat before retrieving food from a small pantry. "Hope you don't mind simple fare," he said, cutting thick slices of bread and cheese. "I wasn't expecting company." Nora's stomach growled audibly at the sight of the food. "It looks wonderful," she admitted. He placed the bread and cheese before her, along with some dried apple slices and a mug of coffee sweetened with honey. "Eat slowly," he reminded her, then turned his attention to caring for his horse. Left alone, Nora tentatively took a bite of bread, then another. It was fresh and hearty, likely baked by Tobias himself. The cheese was sharp and flavorful, the apples sweet with a hint of tartness. Simple fare indeed, but to her famished body it was a feast. By the time Tobias returned, she had finished most of the food and was cradling the coffee mug in her hands, savoring its warmth. He nodded approvingly as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Feeling a bit better?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Nora nodded cautiously. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was inadequate for the kindness he had shown, but it was all she could offer. "You're welcome, miss." He trailed off, raising an eyebrow. She hesitated, uncertain whether to trust him with her name. "Nora," she finally said, omitting her surname. "Well, Miss Nora," he said, settling into a chair across from her, "I promise no questions until you've rested, and I mean to keep that promise. There's a bedroom through that door," he pointed to his left. "Clean linens on the bed. I've put water on to heat for washing, and there are some of my sister's clothes in the chest that might fit you. She stays here sometimes when she visits from Denver." Nora's eyes widened at his generosity. "I can't take your bedroom." "You're not. That's the guest room. Mine's through there." He gestured to the other door. "Get some rest. We can talk when you wake." The promise of a real bed after days of sleeping in the open was too tempting to resist. With a grateful nod, Nora rose from the table and made her way to the indicated room. It was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the hills. A basin and pitcher sat on a washstand, and a simple mirror hung above it. True to his word, Tobias soon brought a kettle of hot water, which he poured into the basin before retreating with a polite nod, closing the door behind him. Nora washed the dirt and grime from her face and hands, the warm water a luxury she had not expected to enjoy again so soon. She found a clean nightgown in the chest, changed quickly and fell into the bed, asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. When she awoke, the light filtering through the curtains had changed, suggesting it was late afternoon. For a moment, Nora felt disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the morning came rushing back, along with the realization that she was in a stranger's home, completely at his mercy. She dressed quickly in a simple blue calico dress she found in the chest, a bit loose in the bodice but otherwise a reasonable fit. Her own clothes were filthy beyond saving, so she folded them and set them aside, uncertain what to do with them. The smell of cooking food drifted through the door, reminding her that despite the meal earlier, she was still hungry. Gathering her courage, she emerged from the bedroom to find Tobias at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. "Good evening," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Hope you're partial to stew. It's venison with vegetables from the garden." "It smells wonderful," she replied honestly, hovering uncertainly by the doorway. "Have a seat," he invited, gesturing toward the table which had been set for two. "It's nearly ready." Nora sat down, watching as he ladled the rich, fragrant stew into bowls and placed one before her, along with a hunk of bread. He sat across from her with his own meal, but before eating, he bowed his head briefly in a silent grace. Nora followed suit, then took a tentative spoonful of the stew. The flavor was robust and hearty, the meat tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked. "This is delicious," she said, surprised. A faint smile crossed Tobias's face. "Man living alone learns to cook or starves," he said simply. They ate in companionable silence for a while, Nora savoring each bite. The good food and rest had restored her strength considerably, but they had also given her time to think and to worry. She had no idea how far the bounty hunters had tracked her, or whether they would connect her to this ranch. And though Tobias had been kind, he was still a stranger, and she had no guarantee his goodwill would continue once he learned why she was being pursued. As if reading her thoughts, Tobias spoke. "I reckon you're feeling well enough to tell me why two armed men were hunting you through my part of the country." Nora set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished. They think I killed someone, but I didn't," she added hastily, looking up to meet his gaze. Tobias's expression remained neutral. Go on, he prompted. Taking a deep breath, Nora began her story. My name is Nora Kendrick. I was a seamstress in Ruby City. About a week ago, a man named Harold Blackwood came to my shop for a suit fitting. He was a wealthy mine owner, very influential in town. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. He made advances. When I refused him, he became angry. He said no one refused him, especially not a nobody like me. Tobias's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. He left, but that night he came to my home. He had been drinking. He forced his way in, said he would teach me my place. Nora's voice faltered. I fought him off with a fireplace poker and ran. The next morning they found him dead in an alley near my house, shot through the heart. The sheriff came for me immediately. They had a witness who claimed to have seen me shoot Blackwood, though I don't even own a gun. Who was this witness? Tobias asked. Blackwood's business partner, Victor Simmons. They owned the largest silver mine in the area. I tried to tell the sheriff what had really happened, but he wouldn't listen. Blackwood had him in his pocket, just like everyone else in that town. Nora's eyes filled with tears. I escaped from the jail that night. One of the deputies, a young man whose sister I had taught to sew, left the cell door unlocked. He told me to run and never come back. Tobias considered her words carefully. That's quite a story, Miss Kendrick. But it still doesn't explain why bounty hunters are after you instead of the sheriff's posse. Nora wiped away a tear. Simmons posted a bounty. $500 for my capture, dead or alive. He's telling everyone I was Blackwood's scorned lover, that I killed him in a jealous rage. And you've been running ever since? She nodded miserably. 3 days. I had nowhere to go, I don't have family, and I couldn't risk involving the few friends I have. Tobias sat back in his chair, studying her intently. Nora met his gaze, willing him to believe her. After what seemed an eternity, he spoke. I believe you, Miss Kendrick. Relief washed over her like a wave. You do, he nodded. I've met men like Blackwood before, men who think their money and position give them the right to take whatever they want. A shadow crossed his face, suggesting personal experience with such individuals. And I know something about being falsely accused. Nora's curiosity was piqued, but before she could ask what he meant, Tobias continued. The question is, what do you plan to do now? Those hunters will keep looking. $500 is a lot of money. I don't know, Nora admitted, the brief moment of relief fading. I thought if I could make it to Denver, maybe find work there under a different name. Denver's a big city, but word travels, especially when there's money involved. Tobias rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. What you need is to clear your name, Nora laughed bitterly. How? It's my word against Simmons's, and he's a respected businessman. I'm just a seamstress with no family and no connections. Maybe, Tobias conceded, but something doesn't add up. If Blackwood was found shot and you fought him off with a poker, who shot him? And why would Simmons lie about seeing you do it? I've been asking myself the same questions, Nora said, but I can't investigate from jail or from the gallows. Tobias was quiet for a long moment, considering. You could stay here, he finally said. At least until we figure out what to do. Nora stared at him, astonished. Why would you risk harboring a fugitive? You don't know me. I know enough, he replied simply. And I've never been one to turn my back on someone who needs help, especially when they're innocent. But what if they track me here? You could be arrested for aiding me. A small, rueful smile crossed his face. Let me worry about that. This ranch is pretty isolated and I don't get many visitors. You'd be safer here than on the run. Nora wanted desperately to accept his offer, but fear held her back. I couldn't ask you to put yourself in danger for me. You didn't ask, I offered, Tobias said firmly. Besides, I've been meaning to ride into Ruby City for supplies. Might be I could hear something useful while I'm there. You would do that? Nora asked incredulously. He shrugged. Truth has a way of coming to light given enough time and effort, and I've got plenty of both. He rose from the table, collecting their empty bowls. Get some more rest. We can talk more in the morning. As Tobias busied himself with clearing the table, Nora remained seated, overwhelmed by his willingness to help her. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her such kindness, and she didn't quite know how to respond to it. Thank you, she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. Tobias paused, nodding once in acknowledgement. You're welcome, Miss Kendrick. Good night. Returning to the small bedroom, Nora sat on the edge of the bed. her mind racing with thoughts of her situation and this unexpected ally. Despite his assurances, she knew staying here put him at risk. But the alternative, continuing to run with no destination and dwindling resources, seemed equally untenable. For now, at least, she was safe. And for the first time since fleeing Ruby City, Nora allowed herself to hope that perhaps, with Tobias Ryder's help, she might find a way to clear her name and reclaim her life. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with sunlight streaming through the curtains and the distant sound of a rooster crowing. Nora woke feeling more rested than she had in days, despite the lingering anxiety about her situation. She dressed quickly in another of the borrowed dresses, this one a simple brown calico that fit her slightly better than the blue one had. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the main room empty, though the stove was warm and a pot of coffee sat ready. A note on the table, written in a surprisingly neat hand, informed her that Tobias had gone to tend to the livestock and would return shortly. He had left bread and preserves for her breakfast. Grateful for his thoughtfulness, Nora poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, spreading blackberry preserves on a slice of bread. As she ate, she contemplated her situation. Tobias's offer of shelter was generous, but she couldn't hide here forever. Eventually, she would need to either clear her name or establish a new identity somewhere far from Colorado. The door opened, and Tobias entered, bringing with him the fresh scents of morning air and hay. He removed his hat, hanging it on the peg by the door. "Morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well." Nora nodded. "Better than I have in days. Thank you for breakfast." "It's nothing fancy," he replied, pouring himself coffee. "I usually make a proper breakfast, but I needed to check on a new calf. One of my heifers gave birth during the night. Is the calf all right?" Nora asked, genuinely interested. A smile warmed his features. "Strong and healthy, mother too." He sat across from her, cradling his mug. "I've been thinking about your situation. I need to go to Ruby City for supplies in a couple of days. While I'm there, I can ask around, see what people are saying about Blackwood's death." "It's too dangerous," Nora protested. "If anyone suspects you're helping me, no one will," he assured her. "I go into town every few weeks. There's nothing suspicious about it. And I'm not exactly known for being talkative, so no one will think twice if I listen more than I speak." Nora wasn't convinced. "Simmons is a powerful man, and dangerous if he's willing to frame me for murder." "I'm aware of the risks," Tobias said calmly. "But if we're going to clear your name, we need information." Though we didn't escape Nora's notice, this virtual stranger had somehow decided to make her cause his own. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, the question that had been nagging at her since yesterday. "The truth, please." Tobias set down his coffee, his expression turning serious. 5 years ago, I was accused of stealing cattle from a neighboring ranch. I didn't do it, but the evidence pointed to me. The real rustlers had deliberately left a trail leading to my land. "What happened?" Nora asked softly. "I spent 2 months in jail waiting for trial. Might have been convicted too, if not for a traveling preacher who happened to witness the real rustlers with the stolen cattle." He met her gaze steadily. "I know what it's like to be falsely accused, Miss Kendrick. And I know how it feels when no one believes you." His honesty touched something deep within her. "I'm sorry that happened to you," Tobias shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but it taught me to reserve judgment and to help those who might be in similar straits." He rose from the table. "Now, if you're feeling up to it, I could use some help around the ranch today. Idle hands and all that." Nora stood eagerly. "Of course, I'm not much of a ranch hand, but I'm willing to learn." "We'll start you with something simple," he said with a slight smile. "How do you feel about chickens?" The next few days fell into a surprising routine. Mornings began early, with Tobias showing Nora how to gather eggs and feed the chickens, tasks she took to with determined enthusiasm. The physical work was a welcome distraction from her worries, and there was satisfaction in contributing to the household that had given her shelter. In the afternoons, while Tobias tended to the cattle and horses, Nora often worked in the garden, harvesting vegetables and pulling weeds. Her city upbringing hadn't prepared her for ranch life, but she was a quick learner, and Tobias was a patient teacher. Evenings were spent preparing meals together, followed by quiet conversation by the fire. Tobias had a small collection of books, and sometimes he would read aloud, his deep voice bringing the stories to life in a way Nora found captivating. It was during one such evening, as they sat companionably by the fire, that Nora realized with a start how comfortable she had become in Tobias's presence. There was an ease between them that belied their short acquaintance, a natural rhythm to their interactions that felt strangely right. "Penny for your thoughts," Tobias said, noticing her pensive expression. Nora smiled slightly. "I was just thinking how strange life can be. A week ago I was running for my life, certain I'd be caught and hanged. Now here I am discussing literature by the fire as if everything is normal." "Life has a way of surprising us," he agreed, setting aside the book he'd been reading. "For what it's worth, I'm glad our paths crossed despite the circumstances." The sincerity in his voice made Nora's heart quicken. "So am I," she admitted softly. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection that was forming. Then Tobias cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "I'll be heading to Ruby City tomorrow," he announced. "Should be back by nightfall." Concern immediately replaced the warmth Nora had been feeling. "Are you sure it's wise? What if someone followed me here?" "No one followed you," he assured her. "And even if they had, they'd have shown themselves by now." He moved to check that his rifle was properly loaded and ready by the door, a precaution he took each night. "Still, keep the doors locked while I'm gone and stay inside as much as possible." Nora nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her. "What will you do in town?" "Buy supplies, same as always. Listen to the gossip at the general store and the saloon. People talk, especially about something as dramatic as a murder." He turned to face her. "Is there anything specific you think I should look for? Anyone besides Simmons who might know something?" Nora considered the question carefully. The sheriff, Marshal Davis, was in Blackwood's pocket, but his deputy, young Thomas Miller, was the one who helped me escape. He might know something, though I doubt he'd speak of it openly. She hesitated, then added, "And there's Mrs. Sullivan, the widow who lives next door to me. She's elderly but sharp-eyed. If anyone saw anything that night, it would be her." Tobias committed the names to memory. "I'll be careful in my inquiries, no sense raising suspicions." "Please be careful," Nora urged. "I couldn't bear it if you came to harm because of me." Something softened in Tobias's expression. "I will," he promised. "Try not to worry too much." But worry she did, all through the night and into the next morning as she watched him prepare to leave. He wore his good shirt and had trimmed his beard, looking every inch the respectable rancher on a routine supply trip. "Remember, stay inside," he reminded her as he mounted his horse. "I've left the rifle by the door just in case, though I don't expect you'll need it." Nora nodded, hugging herself against the morning chill. "Godspeed," she said quietly. With a tip of his hat, Tobias rode off, leaving Nora to retreat into the cabin, closing and locking the door behind her as instructed. The day stretched before her, long and uncertain, with only her thoughts for company. To keep her mind occupied, she decided to bake bread, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of kneading dough. As the scent of baking bread filled the cabin, Nora found herself hoping that Tobias would return in time to enjoy it warm from the oven. The thought surprised her. When had his approval begun to matter so much? The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Nora cleaned the already tidy cabin, mended a tear in one of Tobias's shirts that she found in a basket by the stove, and paced from window to window, watching for his return. It was well past sunset when she finally heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her, only to be replaced by alarm when she realized there were multiple riders. Grabbing the rifle, Nora positioned herself by the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. In the dim light of dusk, she could make out 3 riders approaching, Tobias in the lead, followed by 2 others she didn't recognize. Her heart hammered in her chest. Had he betrayed her? Or had he been forced to lead bounty hunters to her hiding place? As they drew closer, she could see that one of the other riders was young, barely more than a boy, while the other was an older man with a silver badge gleaming on his chest. The sheriff, or perhaps a marshal. Panic seized her. She could flee out the back door, try to lose herself in the darkness, but where would she go? Before she could decide, the riders reached the cabin, and Tobias dismounted, glancing toward the window where she stood. His expression was calm, reassuring. Not the face of a man who had betrayed her trust. A knock came at the door. "Nora, it's me," Tobias called. "I've brought help." Still gripping the rifle, Nora cautiously unbolted the door and opened it just enough to peer out. "It's all right," Tobias said gently. "This is Deputy Miller from Ruby City and Federal Marshal James Bennett. They're here to help us." The young man, Deputy Miller, who had aided her escape, offered a nervous smile. "Miss Kendrick," he greeted her, "glad to see you're safe." The marshal, a stern-faced man with graying hair, simply nodded. "Miss Kendrick, may we come in? We have matters of importance to discuss." Bewildered but hopeful, Nora stepped back, allowing the men to enter. Tobias moved immediately to her side, his presence steadying. "What's happening?" she asked, looking between the three men. "Things have taken an unexpected turn in Ruby City," Tobias explained, guiding her to a chair. "Marshal Bennett arrived yesterday investigating corruption in the silver mines. When he heard about Blackwood's murder and your supposed involvement, he began asking questions." The marshal set his hat on the table and fixed Nora with a penetrating gaze. "Mr. Ryder here was making similar inquiries today." When young Miller overheard him questioning the widow Sullivan, he approached Mr. Ryder privately and revealed some rather interesting information. Deputy Miller shifted uncomfortably. "I should have spoken up sooner, Miss Kendrick, but Sheriff Davis had threatened my job, my family. I was scared. Told him the law," Marshal Bennett continued. "He had his sworn duty to uphold." The boy finally found his courage. "Tell her what you told us, Tom," Tobias encouraged. The young deputy took a deep breath. "The night Mr. Blackwood died, I was on patrol. I saw him leaving your house, Miss Kendrick. He was drunk, angry. Then I saw Mr. Simmons approach him in the alley. They argued something about money and a claim. Blackwood said something about double-crossing, and then he swallowed hard. Simmons shot him point blank. I was too shocked to move at first, and by the time I gathered my wits, Simmons had spotted me. He threatened to kill my sister if I told anyone what I'd seen." Nora sank back in her chair, stunned. "So Simmons killed his own partner and framed me for it." "That appears to be the case," Marshal Bennett confirmed. "And there's more. The widow Sullivan witnessed Blackwood forcing his way into your home earlier that evening, just as you claimed. She was afraid to come forward at first, but once Deputy Miller confessed what he'd seen, she found her courage as well." Hope bloomed in Nora's heart. "Then my name can be cleared." "That's why we're here," the marshal said. "I've issued a warrant for Simmons's arrest on charges of murder and corruption. Seems he and Blackwood were salting their silver mine to attract investors, then embezzling the funds. They had a falling out over the scheme which led to the murder. But we have a problem," Tobias added grimly. "Simmons has gone missing. When the marshal went to arrest him this morning, he'd fled, taking what cash he could gather, and he knows Deputy Miller is the key witness against him. He threatened to kill me and my family," Miller said, his young face grim. "The marshal suggested I bring them somewhere safe until Simmons is apprehended. So he brought them to my ranch," Tobias explained. "They're in the barn now, his mother and sister. I told them they could stay in the cabin and we'd use the barn until this is resolved." Nora looked at Tobias in amazement. Once again, he had opened his home to strangers in need without hesitation. "Of course they must stay in the cabin," she agreed immediately. "But what about Simmons, if he's on the run?" "He may come looking for Miller to silence him," Marshal Bennett said bluntly. "Or for you to maintain the charade that you're the murderer. Either way, this ranch could become a target." "All the more reason for everyone to stay together," Tobias said firmly. "Safety in numbers. And my ranch is remote enough that we'll see anyone approaching long before they reach us." The marshal nodded in approval. "I've sent telegrams to neighboring towns to be on the lookout for Simmons, and I'll be staying in the area until he's captured. For now, Miss Kendrick, you're no longer a fugitive, but I'd advise you to remain here until Simmons is in custody." It was almost too much to process. After days of fear and hiding, to suddenly have her innocence confirmed, to know that the truth was finally coming to light, it left Nora speechless with gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you." Tobias placed a hand on her shoulder, the touch gentle but reassuring. "We should bring in the Miller family and get everyone settled. It's been a long day for all of us." As the men moved to do just that, Nora remained seated, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. She was still in danger, yes, but she was no longer alone in facing it. And more importantly, she was no longer running from a crime she didn't commit. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Nora allowed herself to truly believe that everything might turn out all right. The next few days brought a flurry of activity to the normally quiet ranch. The Miller family, Thomas, his mother Martha, and his 16-year-old sister Sarah settled into the cabin, with Nora joining the women in the main bedroom while Thomas took the small guest room. Tobias moved his essential belongings to the barn's small attached room, which was comfortable enough with a cot and stove. Marshall Bennett came and went, bringing news from town and coordinating the search for Simmons with lawmen from neighboring areas. The fugitive had been spotted heading south toward the New Mexico territory, but the trail had gone cold after that. Despite the uncertainty of the situation, a sort of routine developed. Martha Miller, a warm, matronly woman with a practical nature, took charge of the cooking, grateful to have something useful to do. Sarah, initially shy and frightened, found solace in helping Nora with the chickens and garden, the two young women forming a quick bond. Tobias and Deputy Miller took turns keeping watch, especially at night, though so far there had been no sign of trouble. In the quieter moments, when everyone was gathered around the table for meals or in the evening by the fire, conversation flowed more easily as they all grew more comfortable with one another. It was during one such evening, as they finished a hearty stew Martha had prepared, that Sarah asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. What happens when they catch Mr. Simmons? Will we all go back to Ruby City? A silence fell over the table as everyone considered this. For the Millers, Ruby City was home despite the recent trouble. For Nora, however, the town held nothing but painful memories now. I suppose that depends, Tobias said carefully, his gaze finding Nora's across the table. Some might choose a fresh start elsewhere. Nora felt a flutter in her chest at his words and the unspoken question in his eyes. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Tobias was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with his rifle ready. "Two riders," he reported, tension evident in his stance. "Coming fast." Deputy Miller joined him, peering through the curtains. "It's the marshal," he said with relief. "And is that Sheriff Davis with him?" Indeed it was. The two lawmen dismounted quickly and approached the cabin, both looking grim. Tobias opened the door to admit them, and Marshal Bennett wasted no time in delivering his news. "Simmons has been spotted," he announced without preamble. A station master in Lavender recognized him from the wanted posters. He was asking questions about the Miller family and about a ranch owned by a man named Ryder. Nora's blood ran cold. "He knows we're here." "Appears so," the marshal confirmed. "Sheriff Davis received a telegram this afternoon." All eyes turned to the sheriff, a heavyset man with a florid face who had thus far remained silent. He shifted uncomfortably under their collective gaze. "I came to warn you," he said gruffly. "Whatever you may think of me, I never wanted anyone innocent to hang. When I learned the truth about Simmons, He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "I'm here to help set things right." Tobias remained wary. "How do we know you're not still working for Simmons?" The sheriff's face hardened. "Because Simmons killed my nephew 3 years ago in a mining accident that was no accident at all. I was too cowardly to investigate it properly then, too afraid of losing my position. I won't make that mistake again." The raw pain in his voice convinced them of his sincerity. Marshal Bennett nodded in satisfaction, then turned to address everyone. "Simmons was headed this way as of yesterday. We've alerted all the nearby ranches and farms to be on the lookout, but we need to prepare for the possibility that he'll find this place." "What do you suggest?" Tobias asked, his hand unconsciously moving to rest protectively on Nora's shoulder. "We could move everyone to town," the marshal suggested. "Safety in numbers." "Or set a trap," Sheriff Davis countered. "Use this place as bait to draw him in." Tobias shook his head firmly. "I won't put these women and the boy at risk." "We're not helpless," Nora objected, surprising herself with her own boldness. "And I'm tired of running. If Simmons wants to find me, let him come, but on our terms, not his." A plan quickly took shape. The women and Sarah would be sent to town with Sheriff Davis for protection, while Tobias, Deputy Miller and Marshal Bennett would remain at the ranch to confront Simmons when he arrived. Nora, however, refused to leave. "I won't hide while others face danger on my behalf," she insisted stubbornly. "This all began with me. I should be here when it ends." No amount of persuasion could change her mind, and eventually Tobias relented, though he insisted she stay hidden in the barn loft when the time came, armed with his spare pistol. Martha and Sarah departed with the sheriff the next morning, the girl tearfully embracing Nora before climbing into the wagon. "Be careful," Sarah whispered. "I don't want to lose my new friend." "You won't," Nora promised, touched by the girl's words. "We'll see each other again soon." As the wagon disappeared down the road, Nora turned to find Tobias watching her, his expression unreadable. "You could still go with them," he said quietly. Nora shook her head. "My place is here," she replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. It was true, she realized. Somewhere along the way, this ranch and the man before her had begun to feel like home in a way no place had since her parents died. Tobias studied her face, then nodded once. "Let's get ready then. Simmons could arrive any time." The waiting was the hardest part. They took turns keeping watch, prepared meals, checked and rechecked their weapons, and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the tension that hung over the ranch like a storm cloud. It was late afternoon on the second day when Marshal Bennett, who was on watch duty, spotted a lone rider approaching from the east. "It's him," he confirmed grimly after studying the figure through his field glasses. "He's alone, as far as I can tell, but moving cautiously." The men quickly took their positions, the marshal concealed behind a water trough near the corral, Deputy Miller inside the barn with a clear view of the yard, and Tobias on the porch, ostensibly engaged in the mundane task of cleaning his saddle. Nora, as agreed, was hidden in the barn loft, the pistol cold in her trembling hands. Through a gap in the barn wall, she watched as the rider drew closer. Victor Simmons was a striking figure, tall and well-dressed even after days on the run, with a meticulously trimmed beard and cold, calculating eyes. He rode with the confidence of a man accustomed to power, though Nora could detect a wariness in his posture as he surveyed the ranch. Tobias looked up as if just noticing the visitor, setting aside his work and standing to greet the newcomer. "Afternoon," he called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Can I help you?" Simmons reined in his horse, studying Tobias with open suspicion. "I'm looking for Thomas Miller," he said without preamble. "I have reason to believe he might be staying here." Tobias's expression revealed nothing. "Miller, don't believe I know anyone by that name." "Don't play games with me, Ryder," Simmons snapped, his hand moving to rest on the pistol at his hip. "I know the deputy and that murdering seamstress are here. I've come to ensure they don't spread their lies any further." "The only liar and murderer I see is you, Simmons," Tobias replied, his casual demeanor dropping away. "We know what you did to Blackwood, and we know why." For a brief moment, surprise flickered across Simmons's face, quickly replaced by cold fury. "You know nothing," he hissed, drawing his gun with practiced speed, but Tobias was ready. He dove for cover as Simmons fired, the bullet splintering the wooden post where he had been standing. The marshal emerged from his hiding place, his own weapon drawn. "Drop the gun, Simmons," he shouted. "You're under arrest for the murder of Harold Blackwood and for corruption." Instead of surrendering, Simmons wheeled his horse around, firing wildly at the marshal as he sought cover behind the cabin. One shot went wide, another kicked up dirt at the marshal's feet, but the third found its mark, sending the lawman sprawling with a cry of pain. From her position in the loft, Nora watched in horror as the situation deteriorated rapidly. Deputy Miller emerged from the barn, firing at Simmons, but missing as the man's horse reared and bolted. Tobias had taken cover behind a rain barrel, returning fire with careful precision that nonetheless failed to stop the fleeing murderer. Simmons circled back, heading straight for the barn and directly toward where Nora was hiding. Panic seized her as she realized he intended to take refuge in the same building where she was concealed. She had seconds to decide. She could remain hidden and hope he didn't discover her, or she could act. The pistol felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she moved to the edge of the loft, positioning herself above the barn door. Below, Simmons burst through the entrance, dismounting in one fluid motion and taking cover behind a stack of hay bales. Deputy Miller had followed him but remained outside, unwilling to enter the confined space where Simmons would have the advantage. "It's over, Simmons." Miller called from outside. "The marshal may be down, but there are still two of us. You can't escape." A bitter laugh escaped Simmons. "Two farm boys against me, I like those odds." He peered around the hay bale, taking aim at the deputy through the open barn door. Without conscious thought, Nora acted. She fired the pistol, the recoil nearly causing her to lose her balance. The shot went wide, splintering wood near Simmons's head, but it achieved its purpose. Startled, he looked up, spotting her in the loft. "You," he snarled, swinging his weapon toward her. Tobias appeared in the doorway behind him, rifle raised. "Drop it, Simmons." Now, caught between two threats, Simmons hesitated, his eyes darting from Nora to Tobias and back again. For one tense moment, Nora was certain he would shoot her anyway, taking her with him if he couldn't escape. Then, with a move so swift it was almost a blur, Simmons pivoted and fired at Tobias instead. Nora screamed as Tobias staggered backward, a crimson stain blossoming on his shirt. But even as he fell, Tobias managed to squeeze the trigger of his rifle. The shot was true, catching Simmons squarely in the chest. The man's expression registered shock before he crumpled to the ground, his gun clattering uselessly beside him. "Tobias," Nora cried, scrambling down from the loft with reckless speed. She reached him just as Deputy Miller did, the young man already checking for a pulse on the motionless Simmons. "He's dead," Miller confirmed grimly, then turned his attention to Tobias, who was conscious but pale, his breathing labored. "The marshal," Tobias gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Check on him." Miller nodded and hurried away, leaving Nora to tend to Tobias. With trembling hands, she helped him into a sitting position against the barn wall, then tore a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "Hold still," she instructed, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to stop the bleeding." Tobias grimaced in pain but managed a weak smile. "You're quite the marksman, Miss Kendrick, or should I say markswoman." "I missed," she reminded him, relief making her light-headed now that the danger had passed. "And you're hurt because of it." "I'm hurt because a murdering coward shot me," he corrected her, "and he's dead because you distracted him long enough for me to get a clean shot." He reached up with his good arm, his hand gently touching her cheek. "You were very brave." The simple gesture, full of tenderness despite the circumstances, brought tears to Nora's eyes. "So were you," she whispered. "So were you." Deputy Miller returned with the marshal, who was limping but alert, a bloody bandage wrapped around his thigh. "Flesh wound," Bennett reported gruffly when he saw their concerned looks. "I've had worse." He surveyed the scene: Simmons's body, Tobias's injury, the general disarray of the barn. "Looks like it's over." "Yes," Nora agreed, still holding pressure on Tobias's wound. "It's finally over." The aftermath of the confrontation brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. Sheriff Davis returned with a doctor from town who tended to the marshal's and Tobias's wounds. Simmons's body was loaded into a wagon to be taken back to Ruby City for burial, while statements were taken from everyone involved. By evening, the excitement had died down, leaving an exhausted calm in its wake. The Millers returned to the cabin, while Marshal Bennett insisted on spending one more night before heading back to town in the morning. Nora found herself sitting on the porch steps beside Tobias, whose arm was now properly bandaged and supported in a sling. The doctor had declared him lucky the bullet had passed clean through the muscle, missing bone, and major blood vessels. The sunset painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, the beauty a stark contrast to the violence of the day. For a while they sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "What will you do now?" Tobias finally asked, his voice soft in the gathering twilight. "Return to Ruby City?" Nora considered the question carefully. "There's nothing for me there anymore," she admitted. "My shop, my home, those memories are tainted now. I think I'd prefer a fresh start." Tobias nodded, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Denver, perhaps? You mentioned it before." "Perhaps," she agreed, though the idea held less appeal than it once had. "Or." When she didn't continue, Tobias turned to look at her, a question in his eyes. "Or," Nora gathered her courage, "or I could stay," she said quietly, "here if that offer is still open." The hope that bloomed on his face made her heart skip. "It is," he said earnestly. "But I wouldn't want you to feel obligated out of gratitude, or it's not gratitude." she interrupted, her cheeks warming. At least not only that. These past days, despite the danger and uncertainty, I felt more at home here than anywhere since my parents died. And you. She hesitated, then pressed on. You make me feel safe, valued, like I belong somewhere again. Tobias's good hand found hers, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around her own. You do belong, he said simply. If you want to. The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. What exactly are you offering, Mr. Ryder? She asked, needing to be certain. A smile tugged at his lips. Everything, he replied honestly. A home, a partnership, a future if you want it. I know it's sudden and I'm not asking for promises right now, just stay. Give us time to know each other properly without danger and drama coloring everything. Nora's heart swelled with emotion. It was sudden, yes, barely 2 weeks had passed since she'd stumbled into his life. And yet, in that short time, Tobias Ryder had shown her more kindness, respect, and understanding than she'd known in years. I'd like that, she said, squeezing his hand. Very much. The smile that spread across his face was like the sunrise, warm and full of promise. Then it's settled, he said, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss that sent tingles up her arm. Welcome home, Nora Kendrick. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Nora felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The nightmare that had begun with Harold Blackwood's unwanted advances had finally ended, not with the gallows as she had feared, but with the possibility of a new beginning, a beginning she could never have imagined when she was fleeing through the underbrush just 2 weeks earlier. Tomorrow would bring practical matters to discuss her position at the ranch, arrangements for retrieving what possessions she wished to keep from Ruby City, the inevitable gossip their living arrangement would generate. But tonight, sitting beside Tobias in the quiet of the evening, those concerns seemed distant and manageable. For the first time in a very long time, Nora allowed herself to look toward the future with hope instead of fear. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to the ranch and its inhabitants. Marshal Bennett returned to his regular duties after ensuring that Sheriff Davis had the situation in Ruby City well in hand. The sheriff, perhaps seeking redemption for his past failings, had become zealous in rooting out the corruption that Blackwood and Simmons had fostered in the town. Deputy Miller and his family returned to Ruby City as well, though they visited the ranch often. Young Sarah, in particular, had formed a strong bond with Nora and frequently rode out to help with the chickens and garden, eager to learn from her new friend. As for Nora and Tobias, they settled into a comfortable routine. True to his word, Tobias made no demands, giving Nora time and space to acclimate to her new life. She took over the management of the household, expanded the garden, and even began taking in sewing work from neighboring farms and ranches, gradually rebuilding her reputation as a skilled seamstress. Tobias's shoulder healed well, and by the time autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson, he was back to his full strength. The harvest season brought a flurry of activity, with hay to be cut and stored, vegetables to be preserved, and preparations to be made for the coming winter. It was during this busy time that Nora realized her feelings for Tobias had deepened into something profound and lasting. The quiet rancher, with his steadfast integrity and gentle heart, had become essential to her happiness in a way no one ever had before. They were in the garden one crisp October afternoon, Nora harvesting the last of the summer squash while Tobias repaired a section of fence nearby, when she decided to broach the subject that had been on her mind. "Tobias," she began, setting her basket aside and brushing soil from her hands. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." He looked up from his work, his expression curious. "What is it?" Nora took a deep breath. "It's been 3 months since everything happened, 3 months that I've been living here." Tobias nodded, setting down his hammer and giving her his full attention. "Has something made you unhappy?" he asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "Quite the opposite," she assured him quickly. "I've never been happier, but I've been thinking about our situation and what people must be saying." News traveled fast in small communities, and their living arrangement, while innocent in practice, was decidedly unconventional. "I don't care much for gossip," Tobias said, though his eyes never left her face as if trying to read her thoughts. "Nor do I ordinarily," Nora agreed. "But in this case, perhaps there's a simple solution." "And what might that be?" he asked, A slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as if he already knew what she was going to say. Nora felt her cheeks warm. "Well, there's the matter of the spare bedroom going to waste," she began, her attempt at practicality betrayed by the emotion in her voice. "And the fact that I've grown quite fond of you, Mr. Ryder, more than fond if I'm being honest." Tobias's smile widened, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made Nora's heart flutter. "Is that your roundabout way of proposing to me, Miss Kendrick?" he teased gently. "Perhaps it is," she admitted, returning his smile despite her nervousness. "Though I believe it's traditionally the gentleman who does the proposing." In one fluid motion, Tobias closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Nora Kendrick," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I knew from the moment I found you in that barn that you were someone special. These past months have only confirmed what my heart suspected then, that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up within Nora, bright and effervescent. "Yes," she said simply, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Yes, I will." Tobias drew her into his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender at first, then deepening with the love that had grown between them over the summer and fall. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Tobias rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured, saying the words aloud for the first time. "Have for a while now." "I love you too," Nora replied, the declaration feeling as natural as breathing. "More than I thought possible." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Ruby City, with Deputy Miller serving as best man and Sarah as Nora's bridesmaid. The townspeople, who had once been ready to see Nora hang, now welcomed her as a returning hero of sorts, the truth about Blackwood's murder having transformed her from villain to victim in their eyes. After the ceremony, the newlyweds hosted a modest celebration at the ranch, with neighbors and friends gathering to wish them well. As the day drew to a close and the last guests departed, Nora found herself standing on the porch with her husband, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. "Happy?" Tobias asked, his arm around her waist. Nora leaned into his embrace, contentment filling every corner of her being. "Completely," she assured him, "though I still find it hard to believe sometimes how my greatest tragedy led me to my greatest joy." "Life has a way of surprising us," Tobias said, echoing words he had spoken months earlier. "For what it's worth, I'm grateful every day that our paths crossed, despite the circumstances." "So am I," Nora replied softly, turning in his arms to face him. "Who would have thought that a fugitive and her reluctant alibi would end up here?" Tobias chuckled, drawing her closer. "I knew," he claimed with mock seriousness. "From the moment I saw you pointing that pitchfork at me in the barn loft, I thought to myself, there's the woman I'm going to marry." Nora laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. "You did not. Maybe not in those exact words," he conceded with a grin, "but I knew there was something special about you, something worth protecting." His expression grew more serious. "I just didn't expect to fall in love quite so completely." "Nor I," Nora admitted, "but I'm glad we did." Their lips met in a kiss filled with tenderness and promise, the first of countless kisses to be shared in the years to come. As the seasons passed, the Ryder Ranch flourished under their combined care. Nora's sewing business grew, attracting customers from as far away as Denver who were willing to travel for her exquisite workmanship. Tobias expanded his cattle herd and added sheep, the wool providing another income stream during the lean winter months. The spare bedroom that had once been the subject of their marriage proposal didn't remain spare for long. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Nora gave birth to a son whom they named James, after the marshal who had helped clear her name. 2 years later, a daughter followed, little Elizabeth, with her mother's dark hair and her father's kind eyes. The children grew strong and happy, surrounded by love and the wide open spaces of the Colorado countryside. They learned early the value of hard work, integrity, and compassion, lessons their parents taught by example every day. The scandal that had once threatened to end Nora's life eventually faded into a story told in hushed tones, then into local legend, and finally into a cautionary tale about the dangers of jumping to conclusions and the importance of standing up for truth, no matter the personal cost. For Nora and Tobias, the dramatic circumstances of their meeting became a cherished chapter in their love story, a reminder of how fate, chance, and courage had conspired to bring them together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Tobias took Nora's hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Any regrets?" he asked, though the contentment in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Nora shook her head, her gaze taking in the home they had built together, the flourishing garden, the well-maintained barn, the children's laughter filling the air. "Not a single one," she replied truthfully. "Every hardship led me here, to you and our family. How could I regret that?" Tobias raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I thank God every day for sending you to my barn," he said softly, "even if you did threaten me with a pitchfork." Nora laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been on their wedding day. "And I thank him for giving me the courage to trust you, even when trust seemed foolish." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink remarkably similar to the dawn when Nora had first fled through the underbrush, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a desperate fugitive to a beloved wife, mother, and respected member of the community, it was a transformation she could never have imagined in those dark days when she ran for her life. "Come inside," Tobias said, rising and offering her his hand. "The children need their bath, and I believe you promised me pie for dessert." Nora took his hand, allowing him to pull her gently to her feet. "So I did," she agreed with a smile. "Apple, your favorite." Together, they walked into the warm light of their home, leaving the porch to the gathering dusk. The ranch settled around them, peaceful and secure, a haven built on second chances and the enduring power of love that had begun on a desperate morning when a fugitive found shelter and a cowboy offered his protection, neither of them knowing they had just taken the first step on a journey that would last a lifetime. And as the years continued to pass, the story of Nora and Tobias Ryder became a testament to the unexpected ways love could flourish, even in the wild and often unforgiving landscape of the American West. Their legacy lived on through their children, their grandchildren, and in the memories of all who knew them, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come disguised as endings, and that even in our darkest moments, hope and love wait just beyond the horizon, ready to welcome us home.